What's up, guys? Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, I'm giving you some of my best tips for wintertime finesse fishing. Wintertime fishing. Wintertime finesse fishing especially is probably some of the most meticulous or most detailed fishing you'll probably do the entire year. You know, Matt just did an awesome winter fishing tips video or just a few days ago, and today I'm going to kind of take the finesse realm, right? You know, we teach speed crank. Speed crank in the winter kills an A-rig, a big swim bait, but there are times when that doesn't work. You know, we say or we teach this time of the year, fish the extremes. Fish ultra finesse or big. Don't really fish the middle average baits, you know, your swim baits and such. Throw the bigger baits or throw the smaller baits. Today we're going to focus specifically, primarily on the finesse fishing side of things. So wintertime fishing, what do we have? We have the coldest water of the entire year. Typically, for the most part around the country, with that colder water comes clearer water, right? We've taught that as that water temp cools down, the whole underwater ecosystem kind of slows down. Not kind of, it does slow down, right? So you don't want a finesse bait that's down there just acting a fool, shaking all over the place when everything around there is just kind of creeping. So yes, we do teach and preach speed cranking. That is the one bait where you can't go fast enough. It keys into a bass's core response, its core predatory instincts to chase down and eat. But that's it. Everything else, we're going ultra realistic and we're going slow. Whether it's a swim bait, a big glide bait, or a big Huddleston or a hog hunter, you know, a big bait, we're going ultra realistic because we have to trick the fish into eating. They have to look at that bait, believe that it's real, and then eat. Whereas the reaction stuff, the crankbait, where you're burn, pause, you know, they're just chasing because it's moving fast. They get that split second as that bait pauses in its face. It looks real enough, and then they eat. So there's kind of that 1-2 punch. But jerk baits, swim baits, glide baits, A-rigs, we're going slower this time of the year. Now, finesse fishing, definitely days I can think of, you know, bluebird skies, a nice brisk cold day, but you got high sun, bluebird skies, no wind. It's really hard to catch them on the reactive stuff. That's where we go finesse fishing. So I got 3 main tips for you to help your finesse fishing this cold weather season, this winter. And then we're going to talk about just a couple different techniques and some tips in each of those techniques as well. But let's talk about the bass themselves. Where are they? You know, we've done a whole Where Do Bass Go in the Winter video. If you haven't checked that out, definitely go watch that because that'll be a more in-depth. But briefly, the fish are typically, unless they're out roaming on bait fish, balls of bait, they're typically down on bottom. So I'm looking at the guts of little backwaters, little cuts, you know, the creek channels. People call them ditches or hollows or guts. A lot of times this time of the year, when you catch those fish down there, they'll come up and they will have mud on their belly, mud on their fins. Their belly will be stained that if you have that red clay in your lake, they'll be stained that orangish red. You'll see on their lips orange or red because they're down there rooting around looking for crayfish, crawdads. So typically these fish are going to be glued to bottom. Now that doesn't matter if you're fishing around brush pile or maiden lake points or rock piles. Typically they're going to be down there on bottom. So when I am fishing this time of the year, finesse fishing, most of my baits are going to be on or near bottom, and we're going slow. So my number 1 tip is slow down. Like I said, everything around in that ecosystem is cold, right? frigid, cold, moving slowly. These bass are active when they want to feed. They can get real aggressive or active, but just like when we're talking about throwing a jerk bait, we're adding a few extra seconds in our cadence. So rip, pause, 5, 10, 15 seconds, whatever it may be. These fish, you'll see them, they'll come up, they'll kind of investigate, and then decide to eat or not. So I like to slow down. Those of you guys that are throwing a Ned rig or a drop shot or a finesse jig, if you think you're going too slow, go a little bit slower. Tip for you guys that like to throw like a drop shot or shake a drop shot, drop that rod tip in the water where you will see those ripples hitting that water, and you can visibly see, oh shoot, I need to slow down. It'll help you, at least it helps me slow down if I'm shaking a drop shot. So talked about slowing down. Number 2 tip, downsize. I like to shrink my baits. Again, we're going ultra realistic. We're going with natural colors. Matt did just talk about adding that purple into your lineup to get in those bigger bites, but for the most part, going with your shad patterns, your bait fish, your bluegill, small crappie patterns, right? Your more realistic colors. But we're downsizing. So if I'm throwing a drop shot, I might be throwing a little tiny guy. It's really important to match the hatch the best you can this time of the year. Again, like I said earlier, when you're fishing slow, these bass have a ton of time, a lot of time to really investigate and decide, look at your bait. Is that real? Do I want to eat it? So it's really important to be really realistic, or as close to realistic as possible. If you're throwing a jig, man, I love throwing a heavy jig. I don't throw a giant jig in the wintertime, but I will throw a heavy jig. Matt's got a full in-depth jig video coming up, but, a big football, 5/8, half ounce, 3/4 ounce football jig. I might trim the skirt down a little bit. I might get a little smaller package, but again, I'm talking about downsizing the profile. There's something to be said in bass fishing just as a whole, that a lot of the baits have gotten smaller and smaller because of fishing pressure. Wintertime, I like to do it just a little bit more and downsize just a little bit more. Go with more ultra realistic, downsized profiles. Number 3 tip, and this isn't something that we talk about it very often, but because we're slowing down, because we are going more realistic, and these bass have a ton of time to decide if they want to eat your finesse presentation or not. Scent, specifically bait fuel. Now, Matt and I don't talk about scent a lot. For the most part, we don't use it unless we are kind of finesse fishing. Or I can't speak for him. I'll speak for myself. Summertime, I'm not really using it a lot because I'm fishing those baits, whether it's a shaky head or a jig or whatever it is. I'm hopping it or stroking it. I'm working it fairly aggressive. I'm not giving those bass a lot of time to really investigate and check out my bait. But like we've talked about in this video, they're down there. They're sniffing, they're looking, is this thing real? So adding the bait fuel on there, or adding any scent will help, I believe. I like the bait fuel. You can't smell it yourself. There has no scent to it. It's not too messy. But what I'll do, I'll take, you can see NetBait actually has their bait fuel infused in a lot of their baits now. But if it's, say it's Yamamoto or one of your favorite, Z-Man, one of your favorite soft plastics, I'll actually open the bag and pour some of this in there and just let the bait soak in it. You don't have to reapply as much with that colder water. It's not just like slipping off the bait and just disintegrating in the water column. And then of course you're not moving your bait that fast, so it's not rinsing off, if you will, as quickly as it would if you were, ripping your bait up and through the water column. But adding some scent, doing everything you can to put the odds in your favor to convince that bass or trick that bass into eating your artificial lure. Okay, so those are my 3 tips. Slow down, downsize, and use some scent, okay? But now let's talk about some of my favorite techniques. So basically, I have 3 categories. I'm gonna go ahead and add a Ned rig and a shaky head into my first category. Now, why do I throw a shaky head over a Ned rig this time of the year? If I'm fishing around brush, or some of the lakes I fish this time of the year will still have grass, a little bit of grass down there on bottom. If I'm getting hung up or if I'm coming through stuff, I'm throwing a shaky head, okay? Now, with that said, going along with that number 2 tip, downsizing, I'm throwing a smaller profile. So that's a 4.75 Finesse worm. That's actually Kentucky special. So it is like a green pumpkin-ish worm with some of that June bug-ish belly. So again, kind of tying into Matt's video, adding that purple to get those bigger bites. But again, I'm going with a downsized profile. I'm not throwing a 6.5 or a larger shaky head. The other thing I'm doing, I'm going with as light of a head as possible. Now, this goes with all of your bottom contact baits. You don't want to go too light where you lose that feel on bottom, because you want to be able to feel the transition that maybe you're going through clay to pea gravel or something. You're feeling that road bed. With too light of a head, you won't feel that. That bait's just going to kind of come up and over it, but you also don't need a giant head down there. So I like to go as light as possible so that thing is as natural as possible, just kind of flowing down there with limited to no rod tip movement. So I'm going with an 1/8 ounce or a 3/16 ounce head on my shaky head. With that said, slowing down, the number 2 tip. A lot of guys will refer to it as counting rocks or counting pebbles, right? So you're dragging that shaky head, or you're dragging that Ned rig, your tick. You're just down there moving it at just slow enough that you can feel that bait hitting those individual pebbles. That's how slow you want to fish it. So talked about downsizing and slowing down. On the flip side, the Ned rig. 2 awesome little Ned rigs right here. This is that little craw from Great Lakes Finesse. What's special about this one is it has that matte finish. So a lot of their soft plastics, all of their soft plastics primarily have this matte finish. It looks really cool in the water, but again, exposed hook. So if I'm not fishing around brush piles, or I'm not fishing around stuff that I'm gonna get snagged in, I like to throw an exposed hook as much as possible, because a lot of times this time of the year, those fish are just going to investigate. You might give it the right little shake or hop, and they just open their mouth and suck it in. They blow that water through their gills, they suck that bait in, and you never feel that bite. You might feel the lips closing on your line, or you might see that deflection, that rod tip bend just a little bit more when you're dragging as it loads up. That's all you're going to see. So there's not a lot of real hard thump bites unless you're throwing a jig. We'll talk about that here shortly. So having that exposed hook will, if that fish tries to spit that bait out of its mouth, that hook will catch on the roof of its mouth or its lip. You have a lot better chance of hooking that fish before it realizes that it's not real. So we talked about that little Great Lakes Finesse Ned rig. Another great one, this guy right here, that Stealth Craw by X Zone. Okay. Paired up, that's actually this head right here. I want to talk about that head real briefly. That Silent Chaser head by BKK. It's got ribbed face to it. So it's abrasive, or it's kind of, I don't know, it just seems like it gives a little bit more, it catches a little bit more, so you can feel a little bit more down there on bottom. So when we're counting those rocks, that head is really cool, really sensitive. And then again, having your titanium weed guard, you can move that around as wide or as narrow as you want. But going ultra realistic. Obviously, you can throw your favorite Ned rig this time of the year. I like to throw realistic looking stuff. Okay, so shaky head and a Ned rig. Probably my one of my favorite 3 techniques to throw during this time of year. Number 2 is going to be a drop shot. Okay, so just like I talked about in my number 2 tip, downsizing, this is when we're going ultra realistic and we are downsizing. We are throwing smaller, more bait fish sized drop shots. Look how awesome those little baits are. Okay, a couple tips with the drop shot. So number 1, we're downsizing because we are going slower. We're dropping our tip in the water so we're not shaking too much. We don't want a bait down there that looks like it's had too much caffeine, right? It's just all over the place when all the bait fish are down there just kind of just cruising around. The crawdads are down there just barely walking around, and you have some special drop shot down there just overworking itself. You don't want to do that, okay? Ultra realistic, slow. Sometimes you don't even have to give that rod tip a shake at all. You know, there is water movement, there's current, so that's going to give, you know, a bait like this. This is that big bait sensation. That's that smallie smasher. Okay, real flat body on that side, but that thing gives it ultra realistic movements with very little to no rod tip shake. So that is an awesome little bait. Again, downsized profile. We're talking 2.5, 3.5 inch size baits. We're not throwing our 6 inch, you know, T-Max or Robo Worms. We're throwing smaller bait fish profiles. Okay, 2 other baits I want to talk about real quick, and let's talk about the actual tips for that technique. This guy right here. You guys have seen that bait for several years. That is the Damiki Armor Shad. Okay. Also known to be really, really good on the Damiki rig or strolling technique. And then this guy right here, the little stealth minnow. Specifically, this is the moon dust color. Look how good that little bait fish profile looks. That thing is, I mean, look at it compared to this shaky head. So much smaller, so realistic. What's nice about the X-Zone stuff, it has kind of that neutral buoyancy in their plastic, so it's a lot easier for this drop shot to sit horizontal. And that leads me to one of my first tips for the drop shot. All of your techniques, you can downsize. All of your finesse techniques, your bottom contact or close to bottom contact techniques, now is the time to downsize your leader line. I'm typically throwing braid to leader, but instead of throwing 8 or 10 pound test on my drop shot, I might be throwing 7 or 6, right? Again, it goes hand in hand with these fish looking at your bait longer, analyzing your bait longer. You want everything looking as good as possible. So you guys, when you tie your Palomar knot for your drop shot, right? Don't just loop it through, pull it through, cinch it, and tie on your bait. You want to make sure that when you tie that hook on, that it is sitting perfectly horizontal, right? The worst thing you can do throwing a drop shot any time of the year is have your bait vertical, parallel with your line. You want that thing kicked out. You want that thing as natural and as straight looking as possible. So wet your line before you cinch it slowly, adjust your knot, make sure that that hook is sitting perfectly. I don't know how I can do this for you, but make sure your hook is sitting perfectly horizontal, right, to your main line, okay? Then cinch it tight. Another tip, make sure you take your tag line from your Palomar knot to run it through the eye of the hook and then tie on your favorite drop shot weight. Another tip for you for drop shot fishing this time of the year. We talked about it already. These fish are glued to bottom. Unless they're up chasing bait, a lot of them aren't suspended this time of the year. Most of them are going to be down there on bottom. Go with a shorter drop shot leader. A lot of times through the year, I mean, sometimes I'll have a 2.5, 3 foot leader, 18 inch leader This time of the year, I might go only 4 or 6 inches. Now, you might ask why. I don't need that bait up there suspended, way off the bottom. These fish down there on bottom, I might only want it 6 inches off bottom to suspend it kind of in their face, suspend it a little bit above their head. But shorten your drop shot leader, downsize your leader line, and drop that rod tip in the water so you make sure you're not giving your bait too much action. All these baits right here, that Damiki, that Big Bite, and the X Zone, those are all awesome little shad profile mimicking baits. My last tip for you guys, if you can get away with it, thread your drop shot hook on. What do I mean by that? That right there. Can you guys see that? Right? Thread that hook on, or thread that hook through your bait. So instead of typically nose hooking your drop shot, run that bait on there. What does this help with? So when I tie this hook on there, again, naturally it wants to sit like this. When I put more of that bait on there, it just seems to allow or keep my bait from doing this on my hook, right? It slides down the hook. So when I thread it on there, it keeps that bait more straight. And again, having a straight bait, having it look as natural as possible is key this time of the year. Okay, last but not least, probably my favorite finesse or bottom contact bait to throw this time of the year is going to be a jig. And like I said earlier, Matt's got a jig, a full in-depth winter jig fishing video coming up, so I'm not gonna go too in-depth on it, but what I wanna tell you is I like to downsize. I love throwing, now, I said downsize. Yes, with the shaky head, the Ned rig, the drop shot, you wanna go with the as light as bait as light as weight as possible, but be able to still feel the bottom feel the bottom, have good bottom contact. I will still throw a heavy jig. It kind of poofs up the mud. It kind of roots around down there even when you're just dragging. But I will go with a smaller profile trailer, and I'm going to go with a trailer that doesn't have a ton of flapping. Just like we talked about in the other soft plastics, you don't want a jig trailer down there kicking like a rage craw or something like that. You want something that's slow and subtle. Yamamoto Twin Tail Grub is awesome. A Missile D-Bomb is great. A Sweet Beaver, Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver, Dead Action Baits, those all work really well. But again, getting back to it, I might throw a little micro jig, right? Maybe with a little micro D-Bomb as the trailer, okay? But I'm going smaller. I'm downsizing my profile on my jig. Not necessarily going lighter, but smaller. So again, ultra realistic trailers. That's that little X-Zone Stealth Craw. The Great Lakes Finesse is great. But again, a jig is a great way when you're finesse fishing to still get big bites. Big fish eat jigs, even small jigs, even in the wintertime. And sometimes you will get the hardest jig bite you've ever had in the wintertime. For whatever reason, those are the bites that I don't forget about. Some of my favorite bites have been wintertime slow jig fishing. Sometimes they just absolutely destroy it. I don't know if they're trying to hit it so hard they break the pinchers or the claws of the crawdad. I'm not sure, but sometimes they'll just kind of load up. That's where we're going with an exposed hook. Light weed guard, but sometimes they will knock the snot out of it. Okay. One more tip for you guys before we wrap this video up. When you are fishing a Ned rig, or you are fishing a jig or a shaky head, I throw that bait out there. The Ned rig specifically, I'm not sitting there and shaking it. I'm not popping up. I might have to pop it up over a rock if I get hung up or something, but I will take my rod tip, instead of straight up and down, it's going to be at like a 30 or 45 degree angle, and I will just handle turn half handle turn. What that thing does, it just does this. So it's not gaining, it's not losing bottom very quickly. It's just kind of slithering, right? It's just kind of, it's not moving very quickly, and it's not rising off the bottom too much. Okay, so just whether it's a spinning rod, half turn, half turn, half turn, and I'll pause. If I get hung up, I pop it up a little bit, and then half turn. It's just enough. Same thing with a shaky head, just enough to get that thing kind of moving and that tail kind of moving. But guys, wintertime finesse fishing, there are times when you have to do it. You know, you might be a little cold because you're not out there burning a crankbait as fast as you can, or working an A-rig or a big glide bait. But this is the time of the year where we fish those extremes. We either fish super slow, ultra realistic, or we're throwing speed cranks very ultra fast, or big, swim baits. We're kind of fishing those zones, if you will, in our arsenals. There are times when you have to slow down, when the conditions are right, that the finesse techniques will outfish those other techniques. For the most part, I'm typically starting with those reaction techniques, but time on the water, guys, you guys will learn to read that water and learn to realize, man, it's one of those finesse fishing days. So don't leave home without it. If you're a shore-based angler, these techniques work great. If you're a kayak fisherman or got a big bass boat, this stuff works well as well. So guys, I want to know down below in the comment section, let me hear your wintertime finesse go-to baits. Like I said, this is a finesse video. I might do maybe a reaction video here in a couple videos, but we'll see. I want to know what your guys' confidence wintertime baits are. And don't be afraid to get out there. Layer up. It's a good time. A lot of times you'll have the entire lake to yourself, and it is awesome to be out there enjoying what the good Lord has provided us, and catching a few bass along the way. As always, guys, we appreciate the support. If you learned something from this video, or you like this video, or heck, you just want to support that channel, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys on the next video.